There is no greater satisfaction for fantasy football enthusiasts than participating in off-season fantasy football drafts. There are plenty of free and low-cost options to scratch that drafting itch. Longtime RosterWatch subscribers know that we test our signature tool, the Ultimate Fantasy Draft Cheat Sheet, in thousands of mock draft simulations to assure we're getting value with every pick. After a recent round of simulations, we've made a few observations that we're going to discuss in this video here today. The first player I want to talk about is Juju Smith-Schuster, the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver. There's no player that presents a bigger mystery in early drafts than Juju. Going back to 2018, he finishes the wide receiver 8 overall. That caused him to be a fringe first rounder in 2019 drafts. Let's face it, there was no bigger bust at that position than Juju Smith-Schuster in 2019, finishing as the wide receiver 65 on the season. Now, we understand that it was a carousel of bad quarterback play with the injury to Ben Roethlisberger that likely caused Juju's production to plummet. But even in a small sample, it's the magnitude of the sample that is troubling. There's going to be certain upside built in with Juju Smith-Schuster, but if you don't want to take the risk with Juju at his current ADP, RosterWatch's Ultimate Draft Fantasy Cheat Sheet will certainly have exit ramps to choose other players. Speaking of the cheat sheet, here's a quick word about what's going on at RosterWatch. The 2020 RosterWatch Ultimate Draft Cheat Sheet is now available at RosterWatch.com. The revolutionary cheat sheet that changed fantasy football forever is back. All you need to do is follow 3 simple rules. That's it. 3 rules. It couldn't be any easier. An expert quality fantasy football draft is guaranteed. The RosterWatch Ultimate Draft Fantasy Cheat Sheet, available now at RosterWatch.com. Now back to the action. In most drafts, there's a dogfight to acquire running backs early. The result is about a dozen high-quality, high-upside wide receivers are falling to the early and middle rounds of drafts. From Juju Smith-Schuster all the way to Deebo Samuel, you can draft reliable starters in this range. 3 players that stand out are DK Metcalf, Calvin Ridley, and Courtland Sutton. Recently, we put co-founders of RosterWatch, Alex Dunlap and Byron Lambert, to the test in podcast number 248. Byron prefers DK Metcalf heading into his second season attached to the arm of Russell Wilson. Alex leaned toward the uptick in projected volume and touchdown equity of Calvin Ridley. In short, there are no bad options in this range. Finally, I want to talk to you about Jarvis Landry, Cleveland Browns wide receiver. Jarvis has been one of the most reliable wide receivers in all of fantasy since he came into the league. In Miami, he overachieved with multiple 100-catch seasons and has been one of the most reliable targets since arriving in Cleveland. Landry is one of those boring, great fantasy picks. An underreported story this season is that he had significant injury to his hip and had surgery in February. The projected timeline for recovery was 6 to 8 months. At RosterWatch, we usually like to defer to the latter part of injury timetables, which would put Landry back on the field in November. Likely, you can count on a few game acclimation period when he comes back from the injury, making Jarvis Landry undraftable at this time. RosterWatch steers our subscribers away from roster clogger type players. Okay, everybody, that's it for today. Thanks, RosterWatch Nation, for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe to get notifications when we go live. And leave a comment in the video. We'll comment back.